2 plays later is the rock the cradle dunk that had the Knicks fans cheering like it was a Chicago Bulls home game. That cheering buzz lasted a good minute or two after he did the dunk. This dunk features prominently on Come Fly With Me.
This may be Jordan's greatest in-game jam. His 7th professional game, very reminiscent of a dunk that he pulled out when he was with the Tar Heels on a televised game against Maryland, mate.
I always like to say that Michael got to play with me for a year at North Carolina. I think it really helped him.
Spectacular player from the beginning.
You can see right away Jordan was going to be a big-time scorer.
And showed what an impact he was going to have on the league.
This is NB85, celebrating the 30-year anniversary of Michael Jordan's rookie season in the NBA. And now, your hosts, Adam Ryan and Aaron Steen.
Welcome back to the show, Aaron, for episode 9 of NB85. Dare I say, how are you, mate?
Adam, I'm sitting in the downtown Upway studios about to talk about 2 of the most spectacular games in Michael Jordan's rookie season. So I'm going very well, thank you.
Good to hear, mate. Welcome back if you are a regular listener to the show, and thank you for joining us if you are new and taking a sample of what we are offering through this NB85 series.
Chicago versus Detroit, November 7th, 1984.
The Chicago Bulls visited the Silverdome in Pontiac, Michigan, in front of a crowd of 15,542. Now, the coaches for each squad, Chicago led by Kevin Lockery, and Detroit were led by NBA legend and coaching great Chuck Daly. The game DVD is a Bulls TV coverage, and the commentators are Bill Hazen and Johnny Red Kerr.
You mentioned the Pontiac Silverdome before. A little tidbit about the Silverdome was that the Pistons had to move arenas during this 1985 season due to a roof collapse at the Silverdome from a heavy snowstorm on March 4th, 1985. They rented Joe Louis Arena for the remainder of the season and the playoffs. The regular season attendance record for a Pistons game in Pontiac was just under 62,000 for a January game against the Boston Celtics in 1988.
Good stat, that one, mate. Good to see that you're on the ball there.
Now, in the game itself, MJ had a number of spectacular plays in the second half, which we will get to shortly. As spectacular was Kelly Tripucka. He had a very good offensive game for the Pistons, but what was even more spectacular about his game on this night was the combination of skin-tight uniform, knee-high socks, mullet and moustache. He also appeared to have oiled himself up for the game as his skin was glistening under the Silverdome lights.
That's fantastic. And it's also, as we record this in 2014, it's Movember, so it's very appropriate that there's some great talk of the moustache. And you're rocking a fair moustache yourself too, mate, as we speak.
Yes, for all of the Australian listeners, Mervyn Gregory Hughes has been my inspiration for the other dirty mo that I'm currently sporting.
The great big Merv. All right, we better move on, mate.
During the game, Red Kerr spoke of Kelly Tripucka's own flu game. Kelly was questionable for a game against the Bulls in January of 1983, and then subsequently went out and dropped 56 on the Bulls.
He was definitely a renowned scorer, especially back in the mid-'80s, no doubt about that. And I think you've got a few stats there, mate, that you can probably reel off to back up that fact.
His first 5 seasons in between 82 and 86, he tallied stats of 22.6 points per game, 4.7 rebounds, 3.4 assists, and 1.1 steals. Also made 2 All-Star games in 1982 as a rookie and again in 1984. And despite the undoubted lack of circulation to his legs due to his tight shorts in this game, Tripucka was very good offensively. He certainly didn't look much like an NBA player, but he definitely got it done as a scorer with a 17.2 points per game career average and a high season of 26.5 in 1983 for the Pistons. Just in case the listeners were wondering, this isn't actually the Inall Tripucka podcast, and we're about to get back to the Bulls game.
Just one more thing about Kelly Tripucka. We'll actually be chatting a little bit about him in episode 10 of this series, so Kelly Tripucka fans, fear not, he does return in our next episode.
When our game DVD commenced, the contest is joined in progress. The Pistons were leading 12-9, and MJ is already on the bench, having picked up 2 quick fouls early in the game. With no MJ due to foul trouble, Quentin Daly was the Bulls' offense in the first half of this game, and he gave himself every opportunity to be the Bulls' offense with 73 field goal attempts in the first half. He did, however, finish with 12 points in the first quarter.
He loved to jack up a shot. There wasn't probably many shots that he didn't like, Quentin Daly.
MJ actually checked back into the game towards the end of the first quarter and quickly picked up a third foul. He took himself out of the game and remained scoreless for the entire first half. As the listeners will hear, our synopsis of the first half is considerably shorter than the second and contains mostly info about Kelly Tripucka and the Bulls' upcoming game versus San Antonio.
Yeah, there's a bit of minutiae that we get to in this first half, but there wasn't a whole lot happening in terms of action in the game, especially with MJ scoreless and in foul trouble.
Anyone who has been to a Bulls game knows of their promotional nights when fans get free Bulls gear of all different kinds when they attend the game. An upcoming game at home against San Antonio was Canon Camera Night. Fans were invited to bring their cameras and a pen to get players' autographs, which is a little different than the promotional nights in 2014.
After that first quarter, mate, the Pistons had a 34-26 lead. And early into the second quarter, Tony Campbell makes his first appearance. He was an NBA champion with the LA Lakers in 1988. And something that I wasn't aware of prior to watching this game DVD, he actually wore the number 00 in the first 3 seasons that he played in the NBA. I was a big fan of Tony Campbell when he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves. He rocked number 19 at that stage. And a little known fact about Tony Campbell, he was a big-time scorer with the T-Wolves. Between 1990 and 1992, he averaged over 20 points per game.
I was aware of the fact that he was a big-time scorer, or more to the point, when I first got into the NBA, he was a big-time scorer in Minnesota. Did you happen to find out why he wore number 00?
No, I actually didn't, and I was quite surprised to see it because I just had assumed that he wore number 19. No one at the Pistons wore number 19 that I can think of off the top of my head right now, but why he was a 00, I'm not too sure. That'd be an interesting little tidbit to follow up if we ever have a chance to chat with Tony in a future episode of the In All Landers podcast.
We should probably also find out why he wore number 19.
Yeah, I'd definitely ask him about that. I was just talking about some minutiae to do with this first half. Detroit's best named player, and possibly one of the best names in the history of the NBA, certainly the 1980s, is David Thirdkill. Aside from having a fantastic name, in the 1985 season, he played with the Pistons, the Milwaukee Bucks, and the San Antonio Spurs, and he was also a member of the 1986 NBA champion Boston Celtics.
So you might like to say that during the 85 season, the Pistons were his third team.
Killed it. Well done. Now, Daly as well in this first half had 18 points for the Bulls, so whilst Jordan was sitting on the pine for a majority of that first half, Quentin Daly certainly jacked up a lot of shots, as you talked about, but also he was very reliable in the scoring column. And the halftime scores were 61 apiece. And I'll hand it over to you, mate, for a bit of a discussion about what happened in the third quarter.
A quick tidbit about the third quarter was that Isaiah Thomas hit a jumper in the lane during this quarter to bring up his 5,000th NBA point.
Yeah, good to see. Zeke racked up a good personal milestone there, mate.
After a truckload of talk about Kelly Tripucka, the San Antonio Spurs, and David Thirdkill, the third quarter thankfully featured at the start of the Michael Jordan show. After an OFA in the first half, he was literally like an uncaged lion in the third quarter. MJ's first points came from a steal early in the third quarter. He then drove to the bucket and went off glass for his first score. Kelly Tripucka was actually on MJ in the third quarter, and we can all recall MJ's dunk on Kelly when Tripucka was a Hornet in their inaugural season in 88-89, Adam.
Yeah, that's a fantastic dunk where the Bulls are going to the right of screen and Jordan just absolutely threw the hammer down on Kelly. As we did mention earlier, Tripucka was a very good player back in the earlier part of his career. Most casual NBA fans probably associate him just with the Charlotte Hornets, but he also spent time with the Utah Jazz prior to that as well, mate.
The Michael Jordan show then had Jordan's first dunk of the game, a nice one-handed slam past Terry Tyler of the Pistons. He then, shortly thereafter, skied baseline for another flush, but was denied at the hoop by Ken Benson, and there was no foul on the play. Undoubtedly the highlight of Mr. Benson's career.
Oh, harsh call.
Jordan then, in heavy traffic, threw a few pump fakes and scored, giving him 7 points for the quarter. Shortly after this, MJ hit a long-range 2 to give him 9 points. He was really making a big impact in this third quarter after a scoreless first half. Something I've noticed that MJ often did as a rookie is he'd get himself tied up in the air on a pass and would turn the ball over. Doug Collins once told me through the TV that you never go into the air to be a passer, and Mike did this a noticeable amount in his first season. He did, however, go in the air and double-clutched an amazing pass to Steve Johnson for a dunk, which was the exception to the rule.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal pass, and he waited to the absolute last split second to dish off that pass to Johnson too.
The aforementioned Terry Tyler for the Pistons is currently listed at number 43 all-time in block shots in NBA history, or at least since 1973 when they started recording blocks, which is very decent for a guy who stood just 6'7". The very next play was a Bulls break off a loose ball. MJ corralled the ball at half court. It took 2 dribbles, took the ball to the hoop and sailed and jammed over Terry Tyler, to which Bill Hazen gave the, "He went right over the top of him."
Oh, fantastic. I was looking forward to your first and possibly not the last either impression of the commentators, so that's an absolute gem of a start. Now, speaking of Terry Tyler for just a moment, that's an outstanding statistic that he's in the top 50 all-time in block shots, and even more so when he's only, inverted commas, 6'7", so quite remarkable, mate.
On this play when Jordan dunked on him, however, he was off balance and backtracking to cover Jordan, so his leap was a pretty feeble attempt to block Jordan, but also made for a fantastic poster.
He was in the wrong spot at the wrong time, and Jordan made him pay the ultimate price, unfortunately.
On the next offensive possession for the Bulls, Wesley Matthews, standing 6 feet outside the three-point line, hit MJ for a lob and a two-handed dunk. A couple of offensive plays later, on the break, Wes Matthews threw a bounce pass to MJ for a flying dunk / fist pump combination that had the Pistons crowd buzzing. MJ had just scored 6 points, all on dunks in the previous 3 Chicago Bulls offensive possessions.
Yeah, there's some great moves in this game by MJ in the second half, and in the show notes of this episode, I'll include some newspaper articles which describe some of those moves in detail, and there's just some great descriptions, so definitely worth checking out as well.
You've used the words whirling dervish on more than one occasion throughout the recording of the episodes, Adam, but this third quarter for MJ truly was a whirling dervish of moves and scoring. He then checked out of the game with 55 seconds left, and the crowd gave Jordan a good hand as he took a seat, having scored 16 points.
So the Bulls had a 90-84 lead after 3 quarters. Early in the fourth quarter, mate, Isaiah Thomas brought the ball down court. He faked to the middle, went baseline and scored off the glass, giving him 21 points for the game. That brought the Pistons to within 4 points at 88-92. And shortly thereafter, Isaiah, thinking that he had the open jump shot, MJ rose up quickly and swatted Isaiah's shot back to the scorer's bench, so that was quite good to watch too.
One of the most spectacular blocks I've ever seen MJ do.
He did some great ones in his early career, and that certainly was right up there. One that I can't remember seeing on any previous YouTube highlights of the great man either. Bill Laimbeer then hit a really great, and it was a very tough shot with his left hand. He was fouled by Caldwell Jones, who completed the three-point play. Caldwell didn't complete the three-point play. Bill Laimbeer did. Let me start again. Laimbeer hit a great shot with his left hand. He was fouled by Caldwell Jones. He made the subsequent free throw. That gave Detroit a 94-92 lead, and it capped a 10-2 run by the Pistons.
That shot that Billy Laimbeer got up, it actually looked like someone had hold of his right hand because he balanced the ball in his left hand and managed to just get this little push shot up and score the basket. Yeah,
it was a really pretty shot to make and a tough one under those circumstances. Isaiah Thomas hit a really tough shot in Jordan's face, which tied the game at 104 apiece. And I'm going to hand it over to you, mate, because you'll do this justice. Bill Hazen came out with a great line as well.
Isaiah Thomas, who specializes in the unreal.
I really love how your inflection goes about 7,000% higher when you put on the American accent. Quite wonderful.
If you hear Bill Hazen's call, though, him and Red Kerr were a perfect complement to each other because there were times where they're both screaming into the microphone.
Isaiah was just terrific in this game. He had 35 points for the contest, and his pull-up jumper throughout the whole game was a real handful for Ennis Watley and Wes Matthews to put a stop to. I particularly made note of the fact that Isaiah had a really underrated part of his game, probably throughout his whole career really, but he could hit some incredibly high-arcing jump shots, and that was certainly a staple of one of his more famous plays in the 1988 NBA Finals, mate.
Yes, in the fourth quarter of Game 6 at the Forum, when Isaiah sprained one of his ankles, one of the most famous rainbows of his is a shot that he hit over Michael Cooper off one leg at the baseline.
He was hanging with Mr. Cooper as he hit that jump shot. Now, I really should stop doing those sort of stupid jokes. Now, mate, this leads us to one of the most impressive missed dunks I've ever seen. Jordan drove in and tried to throw down an absolute monster jam over Bill Laimbeer. Incredibly athletic and unfortunately missed, but it was one of the most impressive missed dunks.
And early in MJ's rookie season, some of his missed dunks were as impressive as some of his made dunks, and often had the broadcasting station run replays of his missed dunks. They were that good.
Later on in that quarter, mate, Jordan scored on a left-hand layup, but he landed slightly awkwardly and he came up limping. However, he soon walked it off, thankfully. Also, in this quarter, Quentin Daly chalked up his 26th and 27th point for the game on a really nifty drive down the lane, which gave the Bulls a 3-point lead with less than 2 minutes to go. Isaiah Thomas was then fouled at the other end. He made both free throws. That reduced Chicago's lead to just 1 point. Jordan then hit a line drive in the microwave Vinnie Johnson's face. With the Bulls holding onto a 4-point lead, Johnny Red Kerr makes mention of the fact that the Detroit Pistons fans were starting to leave the building, which I found quite amusing.
And it's an unconfirmed report that a number of the people who resided in Michigan and attended this game actually moved to southern Florida during the late 90s, early 2000s.
I'd expect nothing less, to be honest. Now, with 36 seconds left, the Pistons were down by 5 after a made free throw from Orlando Woolridge. Thomas hit a big-time three-pointer, which gave him his 35 points for the game. Jordan was then isolated on Isaiah, and with just over 10 seconds left, Isaiah stole the ball. The ball deflected out of bounds, but the referees ruled it Chicago ball, much to the dismay of Isaiah and the entire Detroit faithful. The ball was then inbounded to MJ. He got hammered, made 2 free throws. That gave him his 25 points for the game, and the Bulls were up by 4, 120 to 116. Bill Laimbeer had a quick dunk, brought the game to within 2 points.
That's not a typo either. Laimbeer and dunk in the same sentence.
No, it's not. That brought the Pistons to within 2 points. However, Quentin Daly iced the game with 2 free throws. The final score was 122 to 118. The Bulls moved to 4-2 on the season, so a great start for Chicago. And I want to quickly make mention of an article which was in the Chicago Tribune on November the 8th. It's titled Bulls Worth Yelling About. As great as he is, Jordan couldn't do it by himself. As overlooked as he is, Quentin Daly couldn't do it by himself. But together, with a lot of help from their friends, Jordan and Daly elevated the Bulls to another plateau. And that article will be included in the show notes. Now, for Chicago, Quentin Daly was a leading scorer. He had 29 points. Jordan had 25, along with 4 boards and 3 assists. Steve Johnson had 18 points. Wes Matthews had 10 points and 7 assists. For Detroit, Isaiah Thomas had 35 points and 10 assists, so a good double-double there from Zeke. Kelly Japuka, that's about the 25th time we mentioned his name in this episode, had 29 points. Bill Laimbeer, 17 points and 12 rebounds.
Chicago versus New York, November 8, 1984.
At Madison Square Garden, in front of a crowd of 19,252, Jordan's first regular season game in the Big Apple. New York were coached by Hubie Brown. Now, this game DVD that we've had a chance to look at is the Knicks TV broadcast. Commentators are Jim Carvallis and Butch Beard. Incidentally, Butch Beard had 4 seasons with the Knicks, and then he would coach the New Jersey Nets in the 1995 and 1996 seasons. So a little bit of background there, mate, leading us up to the game itself.
We had a nice extended coverage on this DVD as well. As you mentioned before, it was broadcast by MSG TV and even had the national anthem sung by Jessup, Pennsylvania native Dominic Kosa. We also had the starting lineups of both squads. MJ received a huge ovation from the New York crowd.
It was great to hear him introduced by long-time New York Knicks PA announcer John Condon as well. Speaking of Dominic Kosa, just for a moment, mate, as the lawnmower man outside starts ramping up his blowback. But anyhow, I didn't know if it was Dominic Kosa or actually Enrico Palazzo from The Naked Gun, but for whatever reason, I'm derailing the podcast for a moment here, but I had flashbacks to The Naked Gun where Frank Drebin was playing the role of Enrico Palazzo in the pivotal... Do you know what I'm talking about? The pivotal baseball game where he just hijacked onto the field?
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley. Anyhow, moving on, mate.
Two familiar names were the officials of the game, Mike Mathis and Bill Oakes. The game had a very different camera angle, almost at court level. The only negative that I found was that you lost the ball when it was on the other side of the court.
Not to mention the fact that when people in the first three rows would happen to stand up, their bonds would be featured front and centre on the camera,
making it look like it was actually 6-on-5 on the court at times.
Yes.
For anyone who's lucky enough to have seen a game at MSG, the organ there makes the atmosphere something very unique. You also spoke about the Knicks PA announcer, John Condon, being a big part of the atmosphere at a Knicks game, Adam.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be at Madison Square Garden in January of 1994. I saw the 76ers take on the Knicks. Orlando Ruridge, actually, coincidentally, hit a sweeping hook shot in the lane with less than 10 seconds to go from memory, and that sealed the win for the 76ers in Sean Bradley's rookie season. And the organ was in full effect at that game. John Condon had sadly passed away in the late 1980s, and the replacement PA announcer was fantastic as well, and his name escapes me at the moment, so I apologise to him. But it was a great atmosphere to be part of, even in a game that didn't mean a whole lot in the regular season of 1994.
Yes, the gentleman who replaced John Condon actually is
Mike Wroblewski or something like that, actually. It just jumped into my head.
Yeah, actually, that name does ring a bell, or that attempt that you've just given me, it rings a bell. But
I'll Google it while you talk.
His voice was actually very similar to that of John Condon, and also he was also definitely a part of that awesome atmosphere at a Knicks game. I've seen NBA games in probably a half dozen different stadiums across America, and MSG is just like something completely different than all the rest. We'll move on to the game now. Bernard King scored almost immediately off the tip. It took Bernard literally 3 seconds to put his first score on the board in this game. MJ's first attempt of the game was, if you can believe it, partially blocked by Pat Cummings.
I can actually. And mate, just while you were talking there, I quickly Googled it. It's actually Mike Walczewski is actually, I think, how you pronounce it. But thanks to Professor Google, I was close. I got the Mike bit and the sort of Esky bit, but that's about it. in Australia, Esky is something that you put drinks into to keep them cold. Anyhow, mate, moving on.
Moving right along. After the shame of having his first attempt blocked by Pat Cummings, MJ's first two came from a steal. He then dribbled down court for his first dunk of the game, his first 2 points, and put the Bulls up 8-2. With the score at 9-4, Jordan went baseline for a gorgeous double clutch layup. A side note, Lewis Orr checked into the game early for the New York Knickerbockers. My favourite Lewis Orr memory is of when Dominique Wilkins dunked on him in Atlanta and put him into the basket support.
I'm not sure if it's going to be particularly one of Lewis's favourites, or I might be wrong.
The Bulls were really off to a fly in this game, and the score was at 13-4 when Hubie had seen enough and called for timeout.
Well played, mate. Because it's so hot here in Australia at the moment. Up here in Coffs Harbour, the temperature's like 30 degrees Celsius at the moment. I've just had a bit of a swig of water, and at the perfect time there, you made me almost snort it through my nose, so thanks for that.
MJ then went and hit a 16-footer out of the other timeout. One of the game strategies that the Knicks may have been speaking about during that timeout was their pressure defense. The commentators actually spoke of this Knicks pressure D, which Ennis Watley subsequently broke with a half-court lob to Orlando Woolridge.
That is great. And it was a great play.
We had a few Bernard King versus Michael Jordan sequences throughout this game, which everyone enjoyed. MJ had the best of Bernard on most of these, including a sweep move on Bernard King that resulted in a 17-footer. Jordan then hit an up and under around Pat Cummings, and this play has recently surfaced in a different angle from under the hoop, Adam.
In episode 9 this is episode 9. In episode 8 of this series, mate, we actually chatted about that. There was a YouTube link in episode 8 show notes that actually has probably a bit over a minute of Jordan's scoring in this contest from that particular angle, so it's definitely worth watching.
We also had a Rolando Blackman lookalike appear for the Knicks in this first quarter, a gentleman by the name of James Bailey, who had the Roe Blackman Mo and even had Roe's number 20 Knicks jersey on.
You've got to have a fair bit of confidence, baby, confidence to be able to make a call like that.
MJ was all over the place in his first quarter. He was called for goaltending after attempting to swat a Bernard King jumper. Bernard then hit another field goal, which gave him 12 points for the quarter. And on the very next possession, MJ was isolated on Bernard, drove baseline, and dished off to Caldwell Jones for a dunk. Jordan was everywhere and really picking apart the Knicks at both ends of the floor. The Knicks press was again then beaten by an MJ to Woolridge alley-oop from half court and the one-handed hammer dunk by Orlando. This is one of the plays that features on Come Fly With Me.
As such an athletic guy, Orlando Woolridge.
Jordan then sat with 32 seconds left in the first quarter, and it was at this point that we found out a little tidbit from the commentators that Orlando Woolridge is Willis Reed's cousin.
Yeah, who would have thought that Orlando would have been related to Willis Reed? But these are the sort of things that you pick up in this series, mate.
He was asked who was the person that he most admired, and yeah, he mentioned his cousin, Willis Reed, which I found very interesting.
Yeah.
It was at this point that we hit quarter time, and the Bulls were up 36-25. Bernard King led the Knicks with 13 points. Orlando had 14 in the first quarter for the Bulls, and MJ had 10 points for Chicago.
Quite overlooked is the fact that Orlando already had 14 points in that quarter. We obviously detailed a lot of MJ's scoring early in this game, but Orlando was on song early as well, mate.
Very much so overlooked.
It's hard to pull the wool ridge over your eyes. Now, into the second quarter, mate. This was really interesting, actually. Darryl Walker, future Chicago Bull, had a steal early in this second quarter, and it led to a great left-handed jam. I was really quite surprised, the fact that he got up there and jammed it home. There was certainly nothing pedestrian about Walker. In the 85 season, mate, he actually had 13.5 points a game, 5 assists, and 2 steals. Played all 82 games for the regular season as well, so a really important player on that Knicks roster.
Yeah, season averages of 13, 5 and 2 steals and the ugliest jump shot in the NBA in 1985.
Ah, dear. It wasn't all that attractive, mate, actually, was it? Let's be honest. Chicago extended the lead to 13 points, so this was getting out of hand already for the Knicks. It was 43-30 with just over 9 minutes to go in the half, and the most frightening aspect was that MJ was still on the bench, so this led to a New York Knicks timeout. And at this point, mate, fan favourite, series favourite, Dave Corzine came into his absolute own.
Aaron favourite,
yes. Connecting on 4 straight jumpers from almost the exact same spot on the floor, and that really did break the game open.
He could have actually put a masking tape X on the floor as he hit all 4 jumpers from the exact same spot.
It really was great. And with the score 51-32, that led to a Hubie Brown timeout. There were some low-flying boo birds that were appearing over the Knicks coaching staff at that stage because the crowd were very restless, whilst they would be treated to an absolute highlight reel come third and fourth quarter from MJ, mate.
The boo birds giving Dave Corzine a break.
That's right. They were giving him a reprieve. And when they came back from the ad break, they showed a replay of Corzine in effectively his own Michael Jordan moment, really. He was telling anybody that would listen that he was on fire, and you could see him pointing at the bench and actually trash-talking his own teammates in a loving way, I'm sure. But he was sort of saying, look what I can do, guys. I'm actually capable of making these sort of shots. So I really enjoyed that, mate.
I don't think it was just his facial hair, but he's also his jump shot form and his ability to hit that 16 or 17 footer really leads to comparisons of Bill Wennington. I'm sure you'd agree, Adam. Not quite as athletic as Billy, but very similar nonetheless.
That is a great point, mate. And he had a very respectable jump shot, Dave Corzine. And, of course, Bill Wennington, one of the staples of his game, particularly when he was with the Bulls during their second three-peat run. Great call.
And a former guest on the podcast.
Oh, of course. How can I not mention that? idolanders.com/1. First episode of the show, Bill Wennington. That's a pretty fair start.
Off to a good start.
Yeah. With the lead as high as 19 points, Jordan was still on the bench, and when he finally did check back into the game, the crowd reacted appropriately, giving him a good ovation as he returned into the contest. Now, the Knicks appeared to be making a semi-comeback at this stage after being down by as many as 23 points, but they couldn't get the scores to within single digits, so couldn't quite get themselves back into it as they were approaching half-time. Rory Sparrow had 7 points in the second quarter. He fouled Jordan with just seconds remaining in the half, and MJ hit both, and that gave him 15 points. Bernard King had 18 points for the Knicks, and the Bulls took a 19-point lead into the halftime break, 69-50.
And the Knicks were in all sorts.
They were struggling, mate. ST-ruggling.
Moving on to the third quarter, Bernard scored the first basket of the second half to give him 20 points and reduced the Bulls' lead to 17, to which Jordan followed up with a baseline jumper to put the Bulls' lead back up to 20. There weren't too many of MJ's baskets right throughout this game that weren't complete works of art. He had a couple of standard jump shots, but mostly his creativity allowed him to hit a lot of very tough, spectacular shots.
An absolute cavalcade of highlights on this game, mate.
MJ then hit on a long two, stretching the Bulls' lead out to 22, leading to a Knicks timeout. Bernard King, who was surrounded by 4 Chicago Bulls, hit on a very tough layup, which reduced the margin back to 20. Jordan then cut to the hoop on the inbounds play and laid it off the glass to put the Bulls up again by 24. Were it not for Bernard King, his next play was a strong drive with the and one to give him 28 points. The Knicks would have been completely stuffed. The Chicago Bulls then went on a 3-on-2 fast break led by Quinton Daly, who went and missed the layup, only to have Jordan score another 2 points on a putback dunk. The next score was a jump shot from about 10 feet out. MJ floated across the lane for the kiss off the front of the rim, which was one of those works of art scores that I mentioned before. He then had a finger roll at the hoop, which was almost a carbon copy of the previous play. And 2 plays later is the rock the cradle dunk that had the Knicks fans cheering like it was a Chicago Bulls home game. That cheering buzz lasted a good minute or two after he did the dunk. This dunk features prominently on Come Fly With Me.
This may be Jordan's greatest in-game jam. His 7th professional game, one that's very reminiscent of a dunk that he pulled out when he was with the Tar Heels, when he was going to the right of screen on a televised game against Maryland, mate.
I think it's absolutely criminal that an NBA player in 2014 hasn't pulled out a rock the cradle in a game, because I tell you what, if I wasn't a unathletic 6'1" white boy, if I had one and only dunk to pull out in a game, it'd be a one-handed rock the cradle.
Oh, it'd be a great way to honour MJ, mate.
And that appropriately put the Bulls up 23 points. And it was at this point after that dunk that I looked at Kevin Lockery, who was calling the next play for the Bulls' defensive possession. And I just thought to myself that Bulls fans, officials, Kevin Lockery, the coaching staff, everyone must have been just so excited about how Jordan was playing the game as a rookie this early on in his rookie year. They would have been absolutely pinching themselves, I'd have thought, over their electrifying rookie.
I agree wholeheartedly. After 3 quarters, mate, the score was 104-81. The Bulls up 23 points. Starting the fourth quarter, Ken Bannister of the Knicks had a pretty rough game, it must be said. Now, he probably should have got a couple of calls that went against him, and he was starting to show that he was a little bit salty as this last quarter got underway. He then grabbed an offensive rebound, went back up with the intent to rip the hoop off the backboard, only to have Jordan come across the lane and effectively erase his dunk attempt.
Another one of those spectacular blocks from Jordan, the rookie, because he came out of nowhere, and as you mentioned, Bannister was going to put some hurt on the hoop, and Jordan swatted him out of bounds.
Did he stare at Bannister? That's a terrible play on words.
It was after this play by Kenny Bannister that the Knicks game was really sliding down.
Oh, we've got to step it up, mate. Jordan grabbed the offensive board. He hit a jumper. That gave him his final score for the game, 33 points he finished with, and the Bulls' lead had ballooned out to 26 points. Jordan left the game for good with about 7 minutes and 30 seconds remaining in the fourth quarter. To be polite, the players that were left on the court to finish the game were effectively just simply going through the motions. It was a mostly uneventful conclusion. The Knicks did outscore Chicago 25-17 in the quarter, but it was far too little too late. When we were talking about this episode, mate, before we started recording, you mentioned that the Bulls broke the Knicks back in the first half, and arguably it was led by Dave Corzine's 4 consecutive baskets. That helped maintain a 20-point buffer during that second quarter. I will make mention, mate, in a post-game interview with Jordan from the locker room, he's still in his Chicago Bulls jersey at this time, they show MJ highlights on the screen, and Jordan discusses a few of his moves. He admits to perhaps leaping from too far away from the hoop on that incredible Rock the Cradle jam. Maybe he was just being a little bit humble there, but I found that quite interesting that he'd even admit to that in one of his comments.
When that dunk was replayed during the game, Butch Beard actually made mention of the fact that he thought that he almost missed it, to which my immediate reaction was, I'd love to know what Butch had smoked before he'd started calling the game. But as you just mentioned, MJ actually admitted that he may have jumped a little too far away from the hoop.
The final score for the game was 121-106. The Bulls were 5-2 on the season at this stage, a really solid start for Chicago. They were looking to be a very competitive team in the Central Division. On November the 9th, in the Chicago Tribune, there was an article titled Bulls Jordan Conquer New York. It says, in a flash, this National Basketball Association game was transformed into the Michael Jordan Love Fest. You could feel the genuine affection when the 19,252 fans who had jammed into Madison Square Garden Thursday night gave the game's hottest new property a standing ovation. The Bulls' 121-106 triumph over the New York Knicks was a foregone conclusion when Jordan capped off his sensational 33-point night. With 26 seconds left in the third quarter, he picked Knicks guard Darryl Walker's pocket, raced down the floor, glanced back at his trivial pursuit, cradled the ball in one hand, shook it twice, and slammed it home with a tomahawk dunk. That gave the Bulls an insurmountable 104-81 lead going into the fourth quarter and may have opened some eyes around the NBA.
Without question, one of the greatest highlights of Jordan's entire career.
Some stats for the game. For the Bulls, Jordan was the high man, 33 points, 8 boards and 5 assists too, if you don't mind. Orlando Woolridge had 24 points, and Dave Corzine, strong game, 13 points. For the Knicks, Bernard King was a lone hand, 34 points and 4 assists, and he was the only New York Knickerbocker with more than 13 points.
I was aware of Orlando Woolridge before we started doing this podcast, Adam. I was aware of the fact that he played for the Bulls back in the 1980s, and I was actually quite a big fan of Orlando when he played for the Pistons, mainly because of the cool goggles that he wore. Because when I was a kid, I borrowed my dad's clear protective goggles and go out onto the court and pretend I was Orlando Woolridge when he was a Piston, no less. But what I've seen of Orlando in these games that we've been able to watch whilst putting together these podcasts has led me to next February when I'm in Chicago to watch some Bulls games. I'm going to go to the bull market at the United Center and get myself an Orlando Woolridge jersey made up.
Completely understandable, mate. That concludes this episode, mate, where we just detailed 2 of the Bulls games, 2 Bulls victories. Check out the show notes for all the details about what we've chatted about today, where you'll see articles and some highlights from the games in question. inallairness.com/NB85-9. I probably know what's coming. In fact, I know what's coming, mate, but anything you wanted to add about those contests before we wrap this episode up?
Welcome to Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous giddy-up.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. Please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.